We're super excited to get started today and welcome you to ConNEX, our clean energy expert workshops for clean energy entrepreneurs in partnership with New Energy Nexus and Momentum. This is our second installment of webinars that are meant to help you accelerate your clean tech through insight on topics that mean the most to you. So today's theme is inclusive innovation, building your winning clean energy workforce, where we hope that you learn how to build and sustain a team that drives your startup success. We will have experts focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility topics. And we encourage your engagement. As you know, the New Energy Nexus family is a global ecosystem. And we often have folks joining from as far as Australia, I think I recall from last time. So we'd love to know where you're joining from. If you'd like to put that in the chat, tell us where you are. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Joy Larson, who is the director of CalSeed, the CalSeed program at New Energy Nexus. Joy?
Hi, good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to do a quick introduction of New Energy Nexus. If you could move to the next slide. Thank you. New Energy Nexus California is dedicated to building a diverse, clean energy economy that benefits all Californians. We have programs at various stages of startup development, as you can see at the bottom of the screen. And really, the goal that we have is this energy transition. As this energy transition is underway, we're convening the necessary technologies and communities to ensure an equitable energy transition. Next slide. The way we ensure a just transition is by using an equity in, equity out framework. And this is really a set of standards that we use to make sure that we're weaving inclusion through all aspects of the programming from the beginning to the end. And so in our support programs for startups, we're ensuring inclusive outreach and partial selection. We're looking at different kinds of criteria, geographic balance of awards. We're also making sure that the projects we support have some benefit to environmental health, economic conditions, and have social impact. One of the tactics of using an equity in, equity out framework, or trying to be inclusive through the entire kind of process of building a company, starting your company, launching a program, is through hiring practices and building a team. So we're really excited to have a great panel today to talk about some of their experiences that they've had building a team with this kind of inclusive framework. Next slide. Today's panel will be moderated by our managing director, Rebecca Lee. She has been the managing director for New Energy Nexus, but prior to stepping into this role, she was a senior fellow at GridWorks, where she engaged policymakers, advocates, energy providers, and utilities to develop collaborative frameworks and advance equity and accelerate decarbonization. She's also actively building the team at New Energy Nexus California, and so has some great insight on this topic. We're also very grateful to Momentum for their collaboration in launching not just this series, but helping us to bring all of you together to talk about these topics. Next slide.
Thanks, Joy. We're super happy to be here. Always a success. It's always a celebration when we link up, New Energy Nexus and Momentum. Probably should have mentioned at the top that my name is Kula Addy. I am representing the Momentum team. We are a clean tech consultancy based in Sacramento, as you see on the screen. We design, develop, and deploy innovative funding campaigns that help our clients accelerate their clean tech solutions. We've, since 2005, helped raise over $10 billion for our clients, and we continue to do that through our portfolio of companies that you see here on the screen that intersect all things climate, tech, finance. Next slide. So a couple of quick reminders about the workshop today. We do encourage active engagement. Thank you so much for sharing where you are in the chat. I've seen some Sacktown folks. I've seen some Yay area people. Shout outs. Welcome to all of you. Please do more of that. We want you to get a lot from this, make partnerships that can help your company succeed. We will have Q&A after the panels. So if you could please add your questions to the Q&A box instead of the chat. That'll let our panelists and our moderator get quick and easy access to the questions that you have. Please, of course, remember to use all the features responsibly. We want to build great community here. And as a reminder, we will be recording the workshop where you can replay this, share it with your teams, share it with your network for the future. So I'll hand it over to our moderator, Rebecca, to get us started. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thanks, Kula. Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Lee, Managing Director of New Energy Nexus California. And I'm super excited for this discussion and also just grateful to the panelists for taking the time to be here to share their perspectives on what can feel like an outsized challenge for entrepreneurs, our founders who are laser focused on commercializing their technologies and capital raise. But at the same time, this topic is really foundational and a through line for the panelists that we've gathered here today. We have with us Zora Chung, co-founder of ReJoule, Steve Pratt, Director of People at 12, and Vince Wong, co-founder and COO at ElectricFish. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I wanted to start with just a quick sort of popcorn around to each of you to just maybe in a few sentences describe what diverse means for your company.
Steve,
Sure.
you want to jump in, or Zora?
Yeah, sure. I can start. So yeah, I think for our company, diverse means not just how people look, but also more importantly, I think educational, experiential background, because that's when the diversity of thought is really what matters. And obviously how you look sometimes affects that and the background and everything. But for us, like, we hire a lot of engineers, but they all come from different functional training. And then also the different background too, like if you've been in defense or in government versus in a startup, the way that you're approaching a problem, the way that you're used to working is also very different. So I think that is all very important because there's not one right way of doing things at any given point. It's really how all the people come together. So being able to have that type of conversation with your team and making sure that, especially at such at startups where, when you have 5 or 10 people, like every single person does affect the culture. And you have to realize that when you interview candidates and also when you onboard people. So I think just that mindfulness is very important. And again, it's really more about thought diversity than anything else.
Thanks for that, Zora. I think that's such an important point, just in terms of thinking about diversity of thought versus just sort of how folks look and how that can be just really critical to building culture in an organization. How about you, Steve? How do you think about diversity, or what does that mean for your company?
Hi, all. So what I'd say here at 12, we look at, diversity or define diverse as just like a group of individuals from many different backgrounds. And what they bring in is kind of varied experiences and their own perspectives and their own creativity, which we think are critical in driving like the innovation and finding those, sustainable, inclusive solutions for the global challenges we're all facing. So I think like encapsulated in that is a couple things. So it's inclusive recruitment, which I know we'll talk about a bit later. It's making sure your leadership team is diverse. It's, collaboration of all the multidisciplinary teams. It's like having an inclusive culture and maintaining that. I think it's also, retaining your talent and advancing your talent. And finally, it's also externally looking out, like just a focus on environmental justice and just being good partners in the communities where we live and work is, 12's perspective on diversity.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve, for that. And just highlighting the importance of sort of diversity from starting from the top all the way down to the bottom, and the importance of being engaged in the communities in which you all are sort of working.
How about you, Vince?
Yeah, I think Zora and Steve hit on some really important points. And I think that notion around starting from the top in the very beginning is something that resonates very personally with me and my co-founders at ElectricFish. So we're 4 founders from 4 continents. Someone pointed that out to me actually about half a year ago. So I've led all of my pitch discussions with that sentence when describing our team. And it's something that we're really proud of. We have representation from North America with myself, Asia, South America, and also Africa. And it's something that I think is really unique in terms of how we think about, as Steve said, this global challenge, right? Climate change is certainly a global challenge that requires multi-stakeholder balanced perspectives across different sort of groups and collaboration. And I think that is significantly augmented when you have folks of those different perspectives in the room, but not just at the room, at the table as well. And so that's how we've very intentionally approached diversity and inclusion as a strategy that's ultimately going to be really beneficial. And I think there's a lot to say for programs like CalSeed as well, which have certainly shaped how we actually implement it, because there's sort of theory and then there's practice. And I think going through the CalSeed program in particular gave us some really fundamental frameworks in terms of how to actually put into practice, how to actually adopt it across the company and at different levels. And so we've been really grateful for those resources.
Thanks, Vince. It's super inspiring just to hear from you as a founder and how you're thinking about just sort of deploying technology. I think a lot of times there's, not as much thought, and it's difficult, I think, as a founder to realize that, these are entire energy systems, sort of, a set of diverse stakeholders, whether it's regulatory landscapes or funding, et cetera, to deploy the technologies that are critical to success. So thanks so much for highlighting that. This next question I want to put to you, Zora, and I'm wondering, as an entrepreneur, what has been the biggest challenge that you've faced attracting a diverse workforce, and how did you overcome those specific to the clean tech space?
Yeah, like especially early on, still to this day, I guess, like there's an overwhelming amount of things that you need to do, but critical to that is obviously building your team. And of course, unless you already know people that either have the right skill sets or are ready to work at a startup, you basically have to go out there and recruit. And so one of the biggest challenges is like the brand recognition, right? Like I'm not Apple or Facebook or Google. So how do I compete with companies that want similar type talent and can afford to pay more and have a lot of stability? So that was always something that, would be a challenge for us, especially earlier on. So one thing that CalSeed did help a lot with is helping us understand that we have to build that strong mission that also considers like equity, and that realizing that the stakeholders aren't just our customer. And one thing that helped a lot was actually a strong video for us. So that was something that actually CalSeed funded, a micro documentary. And we actually got a lot of people reaching out to us afterwards. And sometimes we didn't even have a job opening, but they just loved the mission enough that they reached out. Because as much as we want the diversity of thought, we want people to be aligned all to the mission. That's one area where we don't want divergence. But everywhere else we do want that. So that has been incredibly helpful. So I think, especially for the clean tech space, where more often than not, you have a more scientific or engineered product that the average person may not understand. And they may not ever directly use the product, they just benefit from its existence. So how do you explain it in a way that makes sense to people and that it's compelling? So a strong video is obviously way easier than like a wall of text or a white paper that we might be more used to, especially if you're talking about like engineering and scientific community. So I think leveraging those types of resources, again, a diverse group, right? Like marketers versus engineers, helping you tell that story, I think makes a big difference.
Thanks, Zora, for that. And thanks for just the shout out to CalSeed. That means a lot to us. For us, our focus is really on supporting entrepreneurs like ReJoule and others leading that race to the top. So it's really great to hear that, sort of the services or the resources that we're providing to entrepreneurs are really sort of helping to kind of push behind. So thanks for highlighting that. This next question, just sort of building on what Zora highlighted about recruitment. I'm wondering, Steve, what are the things that you found to be most effective in kind of your recruitment strategy and that's led to successful hiring outcomes?
Cool, thank you. So what I'll say first is 12 as a company has grown significantly over the last 2 years. I think we grew from about 80 employees up to about 268, I think we're at now. But I'd say it's not one thing we did. We really looked at like a multi-pronged or multifaceted approach to both our recruitment and our retention strategy. What I'll say, like prong number one is really just proactively developing just talent pipelines. And I'll go into a couple of details under that just to try to explain what that means exactly. So, first we're looking at our strategic partnerships like in the community or, nationally. So 12 has developed relationships with a variety of community stakeholders. And that includes anything from nonprofits to different activist organizations to different economic development organizations. We've also engaged with tribal governments, and then also there's the local and national college and universities. And I just wanted to highlight a couple examples that 12 has done. So for the last few years, 12 has been collaborating with local colleges and universities. And just so everyone here knows, 12 is located in Berkeley, in the East Bay. And we specifically, also worked with minority serving institutions, MSIs, when we were doing our pipelining, and specifically when we were building out our internship program over the last couple of years. And another example, we are, hiring operators for roles that we have, and we've engaged with local community colleges to collaborate on actual workforce development for these roles. And we've had a lot of positive engagements, and I'll specifically highlight the College of Alameda in the East Bay as a great partnership that we've kind of created. And the second kind of thing under this pipelining is that we just develop these talent pools. And what that means is that we create talent pools, we find talent, we're actively sourcing, but we're maintaining those ongoing relationships with the potential candidates. And that, remains engaged even when there may not be immediate openings, because there could be in the future. And from there, we do really focus on data at 12. So I'd say, honestly, that we're still perfecting our skills there and figuring out the right tech stack to do that. But we use a lot of the analytics that we do have to track diversity in our sourcing and our screening and our hiring stages of the process. And in a different way we leverage data is just to improve our job descriptions. Because what we want in our job descriptions to make them the most inclusive they can be and appealing to the widest range of candidates. So, instead of years of experience, maybe it's proficient versus expert. And so you're just not counting out folks right from the get-go. And the next thing I want to say is that we strive, and I think we all strive in this space, for a bias-free hiring process. I don't think we can ever remove bias completely from the process, but things we do to kind of counteract that is that we use structured interviews and a structured interview process, and also standardized questions. So what that does is, helps to reduce bias in the process, and that each candidate's having about the same experience through the interview process. And the second thing during the interview process is that we use like hiring panels and diverse hiring panels. And we want to make sure that, decisions aren't being made in a vacuum here. And the decisions on hiring folks are informed by multiple perspectives versus one. So to pivot a little bit, so now that we've hired the right candidate, say, how do we keep them at 12? How do we keep them engaged? So the next is kind of fostering an inclusive workspace and just like really making sure that 12 is a great place to work. And the one part I wanted to highlight that I think we do really well is like an onboarding for inclusion. So at 12, we try our very best to make new hires feel like they belong immediately. So this means providing a structured onboarding process that introduces them to both 12's company culture and also just all the different internal communities that do exist at 12. And finally, the thing that we focus on for internal talent and to keep them engaged is just retention. So things that 12 specifically is, really focused on right now is one, career development. So how do we make sure folks feel like they're growing in their role or growing with the company or growing in their career? So some things we've done recently is we've instilled a learning and development budget for every single employee. So they're able to use that in a way that makes sense for their own career development goals on a yearly basis, which, you know, we've gotten really positive feedback on. And also we just instituted something we're calling a mid-year check-in for employees. So it's different than a performance review. And this is, you know, once a year that's targeted, but also, you know, we encourage it to be an ongoing, like monthly or, you know, consistent thing. But it's for employees with their managers, and the specific topics are around their goals, around their career development, and also their engagement with the company. And the second thing under retention, I'd say, is that we are consistently looking at our pay and benefits. So we're consistently reevaluating, you know, our pay versus the market and our benefits that support employees from all walks of life and just, you know, different support that folks need. And an example there is we had a mental health resource in the past that just wasn't, you know, well received. So we just switched to something called Zira, and it's really been a great mental health resource so far and has really great feedback from the team. So we're consistently listening, doing surveys on our benefits offerings and making sure we're doing the best we can from that perspective. And the final thing I'll say under retention is just that we are building and continuing to work on our feedback culture here. So some things we've done recently is, you know, we have a quarterly recognition program around our values. So what it does is really recognizes employees broadly that truly embody the values of 12. Second, we just hosted 2 sessions with an external firm for managers, really around instilling a culture of feedback and psychological safety and keeping that an ongoing topic top of mind. So we're really trying to shift from folks being scared to give feedback to really like feedback helps and actually improves processes and innovation. And back to my kind of comment about our tech stack. So we just introduced Culture Amp as our new kind of tool for engagement surveys, for performance reviews. And what we're really trying to focus there also outside of those 2 like more formal processes are just like the day-to-day feedback and the shout outs. Like how do we give ongoing feedback and keeping it top of mind? It can be constructive, it can be positive, just shouting out your like colleagues on a day-to-day basis are kind of under the retention thing. So where I'll end this is, you know, does this strategy work every time? No. But here at 12, we do our best to support our folks from that very first phone call they received from our company through their 12 journey and kind of the iterations they go through here until maybe they decide it's not, or it's time for their next venture, and supporting them on like through the kind of transition on. So that's what I'll say we've kind of from that multifaceted structure we have here, or strategy.
Thanks, Steve. Super helpful. So much there. I'm sure folks are taking notes or will go back and listen, but just a lot of really rich just sort of like a framework or a structure for folks to consider about really kind of building culture and sort of people operations and organizations. Thanks for that. I want to end by asking Vince a question about workforce, and particularly how has investing in a diverse workforce or initiatives impacted your organization? And what have you seen as a result in terms of product innovation or community impact?
Absolutely. So I think just I'll answer this in 2 parts. The first part, again, going back to our team itself, our founding team, it's given us a very direct linkage to innovation elsewhere. So we're a California-based company, primarily focused on the U.S. market today, but we certainly have our eyes and ears glued to the ground in places like Brazil, Nigeria, and India, which is where my co-founders are from, and we're constantly, embedding a lot of learnings and insights that may not necessarily apply here today, but will be very impactful for how we think about scale in terms of getting manufacturing costs down, or thinking about cross-border shipping and tariffs and various sorts of incentives. And so it's helped our company grow up a lot in terms of thinking about the bigger global opportunity of what we're really looking to do. Because really that's the sort of impact we're trying to have. It's not just a local one, but really a planetary one. And so just being able to imbue those learnings into a roadmap has been phenomenal. I would say also in terms of folks who work with us, so not directly in the team, but subcontractors and other vendors, we've worked really hard to cement strategic partnerships with entities that not only advance inclusive economic opportunities, but also in some cases position us really well for things like federal grants. So one very concrete example is IBEW, Local 58. So IBEW, for those who aren't aware, is the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. They are one of the most prominent electrical unions in the country, and that particular chapter is the one housed out of Detroit. So we had a very successful pilot with them, where we actually deployed our technology with them for the course of about half a year. And the culmination of that was not only really great results for us from a technical standpoint, but an MOU that we've signed with them to leverage the IBW staff in contracts that we would have around maintenance and servicing. As a very lean team, we can't be everywhere, can't be everything everywhere all at once, as I like to say. But at the same time, we want to be thoughtful about the types of partners we bring on. And in some very real cases, like I said, we are actually able to attract certain opportunities where otherwise, if we had gone with just purely based on things like cost in a very narrow vacuum, but without thinking about the bigger picture of community impact, those would be sort of unavailable to us. And then I also think about, I heard, Steve talk about some of their engagement with tribes. We've done quite a bit of work with tribal entities as well from a customer community standpoint. So we're actively working in a workforce development sense to help build, economic development pipelines with certain tribal entities, or in Alaska, they're called Alaska Native Village Corporations, to ensure that they have a pipeline into the clean energy economy that we want everyone to benefit from. And so in these cases, we've been able to directly address, again, DOE funding opportunities that are prioritizing some of these traditionally underinvested communities. So when we think about workforce, it's certainly our direct team, which we've been working really hard to ensure a diverse workforce, but also those around us, the broader coalition that's helping us achieve our mission.
Thanks, Vince, and thanks to all of you. I'm feeling so inspired just to hear about your leadership and just really being sort of focused on that vision of impact, even from the very start. I think it's super important, and sort of recognizing that as kind of a critical foundation to prepare for scale, I think is really insightful. And I also really appreciate, Vince, what you highlighted about the importance of collaborative frameworks for acceleration and success. I do think we are in this unique moment where, because of that very rich federal funding landscape and that investment mandate, there really is that opportunity for diverse stakeholders to rally around this energy transition in a way that we've never been able to before, but that the only way to get there is to do it together. So I'll end on that, and we'll switch gears over to our Q&A. Thanks, y'all. Let's see. Where do I have questions? Okay. This is an interesting question. What are some examples of the concrete trade-offs you make to encourage diversity at your organizations?
I'm happy to start off with this one. So I think I appreciate the question. I do think that is a false equivalency, or I think there's often there might be this tendency to view it as being a trade-off, but I think, as we've seen directly from our team's experience, it's actually we're not needing to make trade-offs in that sense. It's actually been a huge force enabler or force multiplier for us. Again, in leveraging those different backgrounds, covering blind spots that the team may have just based on their lived experience or their work experience. I would say, in terms of being intentional, it does require effort. It's not something that just happens, right? You have to be very strategic and intentional about purposefully building a pipeline of diverse candidates. But I would sort of push back on that notion that it's that there are trade-offs needing to be made.
Thanks.
Yeah, I would echo the same thing that Vince said. Although I would say that, you know, when you're an early stage founder and you're trying to build up your team, it does feel like that because, like Vince said, it's extra work. But the thing is, if you're not putting that effort in up front, it is so much harder to try to instill the right recruiting practices as well as the right culture. Like all those things that Steve talked about, those are things that you need to think through once you bring in your first hire. And then from there on, because if you have like a culture that is not focused on diversity, it is a lot harder to change that. And so think of the trade-off really as in like, well, you're putting it in the effort for longer term, more collaborative environment, to be honest, because if you want diversity of thought, you have to have people be open to feedback and you have to have people be open to sharing that feedback. Like there's really no way around it. I think that there's definitely a ton of resources that are out there to support you. So definitely go out and build your network. CalSeed obviously is a great one that we have benefited from. But yeah, like it might feel like that, but like Vince said, it is definitely not one. It's almost a must do.
Thanks for that. I love this, just this emphasis on sort of feedback culture and leaning into it. I do think there's a lot, and I can really hear it from you all sort of in your kind of entrepreneur journey. I think that kind of openness or expectation to adapt, right, according to sort of what you're learning in the moment. I think that's probably contributed to your longevity and success. I wanted to ask this question that was posed, and you know, Vince, you mentioned about your partnership with IBEW. If you want to talk more about that, or if there's others, one of the questions was around partnerships with workforce development organizations to help build a capable talent pipeline. Wondering how you've used them and how they can be structured to benefit both your company and community. And I think just specifically examples of successful collaborations. So
Sure. Yeah, I spoke a little bit about IBEW already, but I guess to give some California context, we apply for various CEC grants, many of which are very specific around key partnership requirements. And so in many cases, it's very well laid out what you need to have in your broader collaborations and partnerships. But that aside, we went through another program called the Los Angeles Cleantech Incubator, which I think is a partner of CalSeed. And through that program, we actually got connected to a number of really phenomenal community-based organizations, based primarily out of Southern California. But as we thought about deploying our technology in different pockets of Southern California, it was very important for us to think about, again, local talent and workforce, because we didn't want to, in our very first projects, we were flying ourselves, some cases still flying ourselves to different far-flung parts of the country, and that obviously doesn't scale. And so we want to have, in general, people who know their area, but most importantly, their community well, and the needs of that community. And so this is something that we've been really intentional about. I spoke about some of these, I guess, workforce development programs that focus on the Native American tribes. There's also others that focus on, we're actually working with one soon based out of the Bay Area that focuses on putting formerly unhoused and or youth from the foster system into clean energy manufacturing sort of apprenticeships. And so this is something that we're really interested in, because I think that there's a whole lot of talent that is overlooked, but could be very readily just beneficial and impactful to our organization.
thanks, Vince. And if I can just give a shout out, and knowing that sort of the focus of these workshops are really to support entrepreneurs like you all that are here on the panel, but some of you that are here as participants. Here at New Energy Nexus California, we've been piloting what we call a high road entrepreneur accelerator, and we're providing technical assistance to entrepreneurs to connect them to, local labor unions or local community organizations to develop either project labor agreements, community benefit agreements, to help support some of the funding strategies, and specifically with DOE, the Department of Energy. So just want to shout that out there and encourage you all to feel free to follow up and reach out if we can be of assistance. We've been offering this on a concierge level basis, and I won't name names, but I will say that we successfully match made one of our companies to both a labor union and a tribal nation, and the result has been, well beyond hundreds of millions of dollars from the DOE here to the state of California to support manufacturing. So there's definitely shared prosperity, I think, in working together in these ways. I want to take another question, and I'm wondering maybe, Steve, if you want to weigh in on this. One of the folks are asking about a failure story. Is there a failure story or a tough moment that you might be willing to share, and sort of how you all overcame it at 12?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Thank you for picking me.
If you don't want it, you can feel free to popcorn it out to someone else.
No, I'm good. I think, I've been with 12 for about a year and a half. And we've really been working on like our engagement strategy and, have rolled out a survey on a regular basis and really trying to take, feedback and really act on it. I'd say the first time we did a full survey, about 6 months ago, there wasn't enough engagement on the manager side and actually action planning. So what happened was that, employees took all this time to give us their feedback and really tell us what was not going well, what was going well. And what had happened was that just, nothing happened. So employees, of course, were like, why am I going to keep doing this survey if nothing comes of it? Why is no one talking to me about my feedback? Why, do we even waste our time with that really at the end of the day? So we've really had to be, I would say that was a year ago. 6 months ago, we did another one. We were much more intentional with how we did it and really engaged with leadership at the highest level, because there was really two things. It was, things that managers like more middle management, like have impact over on their own teams that they can help, like their communication style and their like career development conversations. But then the overarching strategy of 12, we really needed that buy-in from leadership as well as what can we impact company wide. So we kind of we changed our strategy into really like get all of that buy-in from leadership and managers first, and really like utilize the HR business partners so closely to work with their business units to really like support in that process, but really have the managers own it. Because the only kind of way to like shift culture and keep it ongoing is that culture is not owned by the HR team, it's owned by the actual leaders of the company. So I'd say it was a huge fail the first time. We definitely course corrected and trying to make like positive change going forward based on the feedback we're actually hearing, not what we assume.
Great. Thanks for that, Steve. Zora, do you have a failure story that you want to speak to, or Vince?
I think maybe one that we were definitely struggling with for a while was, while I did say we, don't want to just focus on like how people look, but thought leadership. But there are times where, like having more women on the team definitely makes a big difference. And I'm sure like every single tech startup out there has said like, it's hard to recruit because like, statistically, there are just less women engineers applying for the jobs, right? And so in the few cases that we did have applicants, we had to actually try to move faster on those applicants than others because they were getting a lot more of the offers more quickly. And so I think it was very hard for us for a while, and everybody on the team was actually wanting to have more diversity too. So it wasn't that people were rejecting it, it just required a more like concerted effort. And I think that was a time where we were trying to grow the team as well. So we also didn't want to keep waiting for new applicants, especially if we found a good fit, even if they don't meet, like they don't check all the boxes for diversity for us too. So that was very hard because the team, like everybody that we brought in at that time, we you know, were great, but then the team still felt like, you know, all this effort didn't go anywhere. So kind of like what Steve said, where like, you know, there's a little bit of mismatch in terms of the effort as well as the results, and the team starts to get a little bit saddened by it, even though like you pretty much did everything that you could. So I think in those cases, like it's just reminding people that we did try, and that like, you know, success isn't always guaranteed. And knowing that like, okay, maybe there are certain things we can improve in our recruiting process to improve the chances of us getting an offer out faster, for instance. And that was something that we learned from, because in general, if you have like a hot candidate, that person's not going to be in the market for a long time. And so you just need to make sure that the team is aware of that process. And even though they have a job that they have to do, like they can do that job much better once they bring in that good candidate.
Thanks. Do one of you want to speak to maybe practical ways in which you've employed the equity in and equity out framework?
I'm happy to take that. So I think we've spoken a lot here about equity in. I think just to further comment on equity out, I think, you know, as we think about the clean energy transition, we want to ensure ultimately that it is an equitable one, one that, you know, especially benefits those that who have traditionally been underinvested in. And, you know, whether you consult like CalEnviroscreen, or I think there's like a federal version of disadvantaged community indexes, and NYSERDA in New York has their own. There are many ways to sort of to analyze it, but there are very clear just guides now for where you can have an outsized impact relative to where the infrastructure currently is. And this is really important for ElectricFish in particular, given that our technology serves grid-constrained communities that through history, potentially through discriminatory practices of underinvestment, just have weaker grids in general. And so it's given us a lot to think about as a team in terms of where we want to be prioritizing deployment of our technology. And I think, again, we ultimately, as technologists and product people, don't always know best, right? And I think it's important to continuously remind ourselves of that, and why it's so important to continuously solicit community inputs, especially directly from the communities where we want to deploy. And so again, it's really core to the strategy of why we've spent a lot of time and resources building partnerships with community organizations, whether it's again some of these some of the tribal nations that we've partnered with, or some of the unions or other workforce development types of entities, because we believe that we ourselves aren't going to get it done. It really requires this broader coalition. And so that's how we generally think about and implement equity up.
Thanks for that, Vince. It's really, I think this is something that we know at New Energy Nexus, just working closely with entrepreneurs, but sort of the broader stakeholders, you know, whether it's local, county government, you know, just to hear that you all are eager to be in partnership with, to sort of understand not only the challenges, but also the opportunities, right, to deploy technology and capital in those communities, those frontline communities, tribal nations. So appreciate you highlighting that. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and come back to you, Steve, because you were such an incredible resource with very kind of specific examples of how to cultivate culture in organizations. I'm wondering if you could highlight some specific practices that 12 employs to make an inclusive work culture, and if you have any specific case studies you want to share with the group.
Sure. And I might expand this a little bit past inclusive work culture and just how we think about, DEIA strategy in general, if that's okay. What I'd say for inclusive culture, like the most important thing you can do is hire managers that have emotional intelligence. It is so important, and folks that, care about their teams. I think a lot of companies miss out when they're interviewing, especially for very technical roles, to interview for people's people management skills. That really can bring down the whole morale of a team if you have someone that's not leading, with empathy and with care. So that's where I'll start. I think from a DEIA perspective and also inclusive work culture, like people have to feel, they have to feel like their manager is being authentic and the leadership's being authentic. So leading with authenticity is super important. I'd say don't reinvent the wheel at your company. There's no need to. There's a ton of great resources out there. Tap into your own networks, look at external resources, like what companies out there do DEIA well, and how could you kind of learn from them? I will say any like DEIA strategy or like how you're building a culture needs to be you need buy-in from the founders and from leadership, and that needs to trickle down so they know there's that support there and there's actually, we care about our employees here and who they are. And I think on the flip side of that, like what are the employees actually looking for on a day-to-day basis? What kind of company do they want to look for? And you should find out the answer to that. So if it's through surveys, if it's through, well, it should be a combination. You could do surveys. You should be having one-on-one conversations. You could do more like, siloed focus groups to really learn there. And then you need to take that feedback, as I kind of said earlier, and take action. Because the worst thing you can do is listen and then just idle with no action taken. And I'd say during this whole process, like open and transparent communication is key. So maybe you committed to doing something and the strategy changed or something changed overnight. Like communicate that out to the employees that like, hey, we committed to this, but we're going to change a little bit because of this. Because if you don't explain the whys behind stuff, all of that kind of work that's doing and people's engagement does diminish. And I think the last thing I'll say is cultures do grow organically, but as leaders, we have to be intentional about our culture of inclusivity. So our goal here at 12 is that each employee feels like they have a voice and they can show up as their authentic self every day they come to work. And we also find that as another pivotal driver in actually allowing 12 to deliver on our business goals.
Thanks. I love just this, the ways in which all three of you have sort of disrupted this notion and this false dichotomy that you have to choose between culture and people and business and profitability or success and acceleration. I think it's really, really just very inspiring to hear. And also from you guys, the concrete ways in which you're entrepreneurs, you're finding your way, you're running a business, you're commercializing a technology at the same time that you really are very kind of, mission oriented in the work that you're doing. It's very inspiring. Thank you all. We still have a few more questions that we have time for, and I want to hit. You actually, Steve, highlighted about resources and this idea of swarming together, which I really love, right? We don't have to reinvent the wheel. And so I'm wondering, what are some of the resources that you can recommend to startups who are on this call? It's really standing out to me the ways in which you all have made space and just made it a priority in leadership. And I also know from talking to entrepreneurs in real talk that, they are so focused on capital raise, commercializing technology. It's so hard to think kind of, strategically or to think about impact. So what are some of the resources that you all can recommend to startups in this space?
I'm happy to start there. And I'll take it from, a very people-minded lens. I think be very intentional about your HR tech stack and kind of the, technology you're working with to best enable the business to be innovative and to, commercialize that technology. I'd say, we have Culture Amp down. They have a ton of resources, a ton of engagement data across the whole, country and globally, and all the stuff that we can use to kind of benchmark against, which we didn't have before we went into Culture Amp. And another, for example, we were on a call with LinkedIn yesterday, and we're trying out their LinkedIn Insights, which, could potentially be super helpful for our recruiting team because it tells you very specific insights into, hey, I need this very technical role. There's only 250 folks on LinkedIn that even have this skill across the country. What companies they're moving from, going to, just to better educate ourselves onto if this is a unicorn candidate, maybe we back up on a couple of things we need and just find someone that can fully do the job, or we should wait and really double down to find this person that's going to like be able to do the work that we need done and, you know, be that innovative leader here. So I'd say just like utilizing the resources you have internally, but also as you're building out and you're scaling, like making sure you're picking things that can scale and help you continue to grow the business and be the most insightful and the most just, I guess, innovative you can be.
Thanks. Do either one of you just want to weigh in quickly about resources that you might recommend for startups in this space? If not, I have another last question. Yep, go ahead, Vince.
Yeah, I would just say there's certainly traditional sort of the traditional hiring process, but then I would say, you know, our startup in particular, especially in those periods where we've been very resource constrained, have certainly leveraged tools like so with Lacey, there was like the APC fellowship, which focused on developing, you know, I think recent or about to be college grads from disadvantaged backgrounds. We have also worked with the University of Michigan through their Pro Jane Tech Lab and bringing on a very diverse set of interns from both the graduate and undergraduate levels. And then I mentioned this other program called NovaWorks, which we're exploring based in the Bay Area. I think it's only for businesses in San Mateo County, but I can drop a link. But basically it connects primarily, I think, manufacturing, but also other sorts of technology companies with their young adult program or youth adult program, which is focused on, I think, those between 17 to 21 years old who are from maybe like broken homes or maybe they themselves have a history of drug addiction and now are on the rehabilitation path. So there's definitely a number of programs to supplement the traditional recruiting channels, is all I'll say.
Thanks. And I'm just going to end with this question. It's a little bit of like postcards from the future for you all, having grown from CalSeed startups to where you are today. What do you know now that you wish you knew then, sort of at the start of your journey, about diversity, equity, inclusion, access? If you could send a postcard from the future to yourself, what would you say?
I think one thing is kind of something we already covered, but reminding myself that it's not a trade-off, and it's something that it actually is very important and can actually pay dividends in the future. So and the thing is, it's like it doesn't have to be. I think also I thought it had to be this big thing that I had to come out with myself, and we had to do like how big companies do everything. It's like it's actually not that difficult, especially if you're hiring like for the first 5 people, right? Like that itself is already a very difficult task. So it's just really being thoughtful. Okay, once we have these people in, like, what are the backgrounds that they have? How do I want them to be interacting? Like, how do I want them to be working with each other? And then also to a larger extent too, like thinking through the equity out piece, right? So what's the output of your product? Who does this affect? Who are the stakeholders? Like for ReJoule, we do battery diagnostics. And one thing that we want to do is make it easier for a mechanic to become a battery technician, right? So are there people that are in the staff that might have had automotive backgrounds or were a former mechanic, right? Like you want to hire those types of folks. And, you know, maybe if they happen to also have like the engineering background we need, that can beautifully come in one person. And while that may be rare, that doesn't mean it's impossible. And I think the more, you know, the type of people that you're looking for and the outcome that you want, putting in the right culture in place to and ensure that that flowers is very important. And I think Steve made a great point too, also that like the culture is very much from the founder, but it also is constantly changing too. And I think knowing that up front is very helpful because it's very easy to forget that, especially once you have the team in place, saying, okay, on to the next thing that I need to do. But then like, if you give everybody whiplash, like that's just going to have like consequences too. So I think just realizing that, and that point about having EQ is just so important.
Yeah, I was certainly taking a lot of notes during both of your responses to these questions. I think Zora said it really nicely. I would just maybe paraphrase by saying, do it early and often. So I think, as Zora had pointed out a few questions ago, the earlier you have that foundation in place, the more you have to build, or the more that you can build upon. But at the same time, don't be complacent. I think there is, sometimes that tendency to want to just like pat yourself on the back and say, okay, time to move on. But I think it is something that it's going to be with the company should be with the company through its entire life cycle. And so to not be complacent and to keep iterating. And I think all the practices and acknowledgement that Steve had around just how they iterated based on like very nimbly, I think that's really important too. So being able to acknowledge gaps when they occur and then be able to remedy them quickly.
And I think what I'll say from more of I think we've realized how important just like community engagement is, especially where we're on a journey of like opening our first fuel plant in Washington and like further from there. So really engaging so early in the process with the local community, like we especially learned this like through just trying to get different like environmental grants. And such a big part of it right now is like, how are you going to actually improve the communities you go into? So it's having those conversations so early, developing that relationship, even if it doesn't work out, like you've built that, you never know what's going to happen in the future. And I think it's just like become very apparent that like, hey, through this grant, we're going to use some of this money to actually put in like this program for the local community college. We're going to hire this person that will do this thing in the community. So we're like, have been like now so intentional about like, what kind of impact do we want to make on the communities that we're, operating in? So I think that's been our biggest, like, wish we knew that from day one, but it's been great to learn and kind of pivot and do the right thing.
Thank you all. That's such sage advice, particularly coming from you all. So thank you for that. I think our takeaway is focus on impact, right, from the very beginning, and have that be a through line in the work that you do. And there really is sort of success and acceleration there. I'm going to pass it over to Elisa.
Hi, everyone. Well, we're getting this slide up. Thanks so much to our amazing panelists. That was so inspiring and chock full of resources. I'm head of partnerships, events, and brand at New Energy Nexus California. And I just want to thank you for coming. This is our second installation of our ConNEX workshop series, and we're excited for more. So these happen every other month. And I'm really excited about our next workshop coming up November 21st. And that one is called Partnering for Progress, Scaling Innovation and Clean Energy. So this is going to be a very tactical and tangible workshop all about strategic partnerships and how to think about them across the value chain and the scaling process for clean energy startups. So please join us. We'll be sharing out about our speakers really soon. And then we are basing these and future topics off of what you all are excited about. So if you could just take a second to click on the link in the chat and fill out, I think it's a 1-question survey. We will base our January topic off of what's top of mind and most interesting and helpful to all of you. So that feedback is really important and appreciated. With that, with 2 minutes left, I'll give you 2 minutes to take the survey. So thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.